They sealed off C deck, but the humans survived. Part 5. Unsealed. The bulkhead doors opened 18 hours after they had closed. The sound they made was the same deep, heavy thud that Do-hyun had heard when they sealed, but in reverse. A grinding of gears, a hiss of hydraulics, and then the slow upward movement of metal slabs that weighed more than most ground vehicles. Light from the upper decks spilled into the red-lit corridor of C deck, warm and white and almost painful after so many hours in the dark. Captain Vorshin stood on the other side with a full emergency response team behind him. 12 Russian officers in clean uniforms, carrying medical kits and atmospheric scanners and thermal recovery equipment. They had come prepared for a rescue mission. They had come prepared to find bodies, or at most, a few barely alive survivors clinging to the last thin breaths of a dying deck. What they found was something else entirely. The corridor of C deck was clean, not spotless, but organized. The debris from the initial breach had been cleared and stacked neatly against the walls. The emergency lighting was still on, casting its red glow over everything, but someone had repositioned several of the portable light units to create brighter zones at key intersections. There were markings on the walls, written in grease pencil, pointing to the medical bay, the supply station, and the water distribution point. Someone had created a map. Someone had created a system. Vorshin walked slowly into the corridor. His emergency team followed, but they did not rush forward. They moved carefully, almost cautiously, as if they were entering a place they did not fully understand. The first person they encountered was Haeun. She was sitting at a small table made from stacked cargo crates near the center of the main corridor. In front of her was a notebook, a pencil, and a neatly organized set of supply lists. She looked up when the bulkhead opened, and her face showed relief, but not surprise. She had known they were coming. Jinho's transmitter had confirmed it 2 hours ago. 32 crew members alive and accounted for, she said to Vorshin. Her voice was steady. 3 still receiving medical treatment in the secondary medical bay. All others are stable. We have enough food and water for another 24 hours at current rationing levels. Our oxygen supply from the rerouted hydroponic system is holding, but it will need to be reconnected to the main supply within the next 6 hours. Vorshin stared at her. Haeun was small even by human standards. She was 22 years old. She was a logistics clerk. Her job on this ship was to count boxes and fill out shipping forms, and she was delivering a situation report with the calm precision of a seasoned officer. He did not respond to her immediately. He walked past her, deeper into C deck, and what he saw there changed something inside him that would never change back. The Russian crew members were on their feet. Not all of them, but most. They were moving, working. 2 of them were carrying water containers to a distribution point near the medical bay. 3 more were stacking thermal blankets into neat piles, preparing them for return to storage. The Pitik workers, who should have been dead from oxygen deprivation hours ago, were huddled under blankets, but breathing steadily, their small eyes alert and watchful. The Holosi technicians were walking the perimeter, checking the walls and conduits, exactly as Haeun had assigned them to do hours ago. They had not just survived. They had built a functioning community inside a sealed tomb. Vorshin reached the hull breach in Section 7. He stood in the narrow utility space and looked at the patch that Taewon and Eunji had made. It was ugly. It was a sheet of wall panel covered in layers of adhesive tape and silicone sealant, heated into place with a modified fire extinguisher. No certified tools. No approved materials. No authorized procedure. By every standard of Russian engineering practice, it should not have worked. But it had worked. The atmospheric readings proved it. 87% integrity and holding. The patch was solid, not permanent, not elegant, but solid. It had kept 32 people alive for 18 hours in conditions that should have killed them in 6. Vorshan touched the edge of the patch with one finger. The silicone was hard and cold under his hand. He could feel the faint vibration of the ship's hull beneath it, the constant hum of a vessel moving through space. He stood there for a long time, saying nothing. When he walked back to the main corridor, Do-hyun was waiting for him. The chief engineer looked like he had been through a war. His uniform was torn and stained with grease, silicone, and what might have been blood. His hands were raw and red from hours of work in freezing temperatures. His face was drawn with exhaustion, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of a man who had not allowed himself to rest even for a moment. But he was standing straight, and his eyes were clear. He held out a folded piece of paper. Vorshan took it and opened it. It was a damage report. A full, detailed damage report covering the hull breach, the atmospheric conditions, the repair work, the medical status of every injured crew member, the supply inventory, and a list of recommended follow-up actions. It was thorough. It was organized. It was the kind of report that Vorshan would have expected from his own first officer, not from a sealed-off maintenance crew, working with nothing. "When did you write this?" Vorshan asked. "I started it about 2 hours ago," Do-hyun said. "When we knew you were going to open the doors, I wanted to make sure you had everything you needed." Vorshan looked at the report, then at Do-hyun, then back down the corridor at the organized, functioning remnant of what should have been a graveyard. The rescued Russian crew members were already being checked by the emergency medical team. But they did not look like people who had been rescued. They looked like people who had been working and had simply been joined by new arrivals. "My training," Vorshan said slowly, "told me that sealing this deck was the correct decision. The protocol is clear. A compromise section is sealed to protect the hull. The math supports it. The survival rate of the ship improves when damaged sections are cut away quickly." Do-hyun said nothing. He just stood there and waited. "My training did not account for this," Vorshan said. He folded the damage report carefully and placed it inside his uniform. It did not account for people who refused to be cut away. He turned and walked back toward the bulkhead. At the threshold, he stopped and looked back at Do-hyun one more time. "Your crew will receive full medical attention and rest quarters on A deck. All 7 of your humans will be noted in the official record." "All 32 of us will be noted," Do-hyun said quietly. "We survived together." Vorshan held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once and left. The story traveled fast. Not through official channels at first, but through the quiet networks that connected every cargo ship, space station, and colony world in the sector. Crew members talked. Dock workers whispered. By the time the pale horizon reached its next port, the story of Sea Deck had already arrived ahead of it. The Rushan Fleet Command reviewed the incident in a closed session. The official finding was that Captain Vorshan had acted within protocol when he sealed Sea Deck, and that the survival of the crew was an unexpected outcome resulting from unauthorized improvisation by the human crew members. The report recommended no changes to existing SEAL protocols. But there was a second document, one that was not part of the official finding. It was a single entry added to the Rushan Species Assessment Archive, the massive database that cataloged the traits, capabilities, and behavioral patterns of every known species in the galaxy. The archive was used by fleet commanders, diplomats, and colony planners to understand the species they worked with. It was updated rarely, and only when new information was considered significant enough to change the existing understanding of a species. The entry for humans had not been updated in over 40 years. It described them as adaptable, social, and moderately intelligent, with a noted tendency toward emotional decision-making. Standard assessment. Nothing remarkable. The new entry was written by Fleet Commander Sorath himself. the highest-ranking officer in the Russian civilian fleet. It was a single line, added beneath the existing assessment without explanation or context. It read, "Do not seal humans in. They do not die. They organize." In the years that followed, that line became the most referenced entry in the entire archive. Other species read it and wondered what it meant. Those who had worked alongside humans understood immediately. And, in the quiet corners of cargo ships and colony outposts across the galaxy, the story of SeaDeck was told and retold, growing larger with each telling, but never losing the core truth at its center. 7 humans had been sealed in a tomb. They had refused to die, and they had brought 32 people out alive. Not because they were stronger than anyone else, not because they were smarter, but because somewhere deep in the bones of every human being, in the place where fear lives, right next to something that has no proper name, there is a voice that says one simple thing: not yet. They sealed off SeaDeck, but the humans survived. Part 4. The Signal Out. Jinho sat on the cold floor with the guts of an entertainment console spread out around him like the organs of some mechanical animal. Wires, circuit boards, display chips, a speaker unit, and a cracked power cell that still held about 30% of its charge. It was not much to work with. An entertainment console was designed to play music and show videos. It was not designed to send signals through the walls of a sealed starship. But Jinho had not been designed for this situation either. And here he was. He had been a maintenance technician for 6 years. Before that, he had studied electrical engineering at a small university back on Earth, the kind of place where students learned by taking things apart because the school could not afford to buy new ones. Jinho had rebuilt radio transmitters from scrap. He had fixed a colony water purifier using parts from a broken air conditioner when he was 23. He had once repaired a shuttle navigation system with a length of copper wire and a prayer. This was not new territory for him. It was just colder. The problem was not building a transmitter. The problem was range. A signal strong enough to leave SeaDeck and reach the bridge had to pass through multiple layers of reinforced bulkhead, shielded power conduits, and the ship's own electromagnetic noise. The entertainment console's communication chip was only rated for local network connections within a single deck section. It could barely reach the next room, let alone 5 decks up. Soman sat down next to him and watched him work for a few minutes before speaking. "You cannot punch through the bulkheads with that," she said. It was not a question. "No," Jinho agreed. "Not directly." "So what are you thinking?" Jinho held up a small circuit board between his thumb and forefinger. "This is the console's network interface. It is designed to connect to the ship's internal data network. The network is shut down for our section, but the hardware that carries it is still physically in place. The sensor grid runs through every deck on this ship. Temperature sensors, pressure monitors, radiation detectors. They all feed data through the same wiring that the entertainment network uses." Salman understood immediately. "You want to send a signal through the sensor grid." "The sensors on the bridge still read data from SeaDeck. That is how they know the atmosphere down here is failing. The data connection is one way. It was designed for the bridge to monitor us, not for us to talk back. But a data line is a data line. If I can modulate a signal onto the sensor feed, the bridge instruments will pick it up as interference." "They will think it is noise," Soman said. "They will think it is noise," Jinho agreed, "unless I make it very clearly not noise." He worked for another 2 hours. His fingers were stiff from the cold, and the dim red emergency lighting made it hard to tell which wires were which. Twice he shorted a connection and had to start over. The third time the small power cell sparked and burned his thumb, and he sat still for a moment holding his hand against his chest, breathing through the pain, before going back to work. While Jinho built, Heian organized. She had not stopped moving since the seal. The young logistics clerk had found a purpose in the chaos that seemed almost too large for her small frame, but she carried it without complaint. She had counted every person on C deck. She had distributed every thermal blanket. She had rationed the emergency food packs into portions that would last 48 hours if everyone ate only twice. And now she was doing something that the aliens found deeply strange. She was giving people jobs. Not real jobs. Not technical work like what Jinho and Taewon were doing. Simple things. Small things. She told one group of Rushan to collect every empty container on the deck and stack them near the medical bay. She told the Piddick workers to sort through the remaining supply crates and make a list of everything inside. She told the two Holosi technicians to walk the perimeter of the sealed section every 30 minutes and report any changes they noticed. None of these tasks were critical. None of them would save anyone's life. But that was not the point. The Rushan female with the scar on her jaw, who had been the first to stand when Dohan asked for help hours ago, stopped Haeyeon in the corridor. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. Her voice was rough, but not unkind. "These tasks you give us, they are meaningless." Haeyeon looked up at her. The Rushan was almost twice her height, and Haeyeon had to tilt her head back to meet her eyes. "They are not meaningless," she said. "When you are working, you are not sitting. When you are not sitting, you are not giving up. And when you are not giving up, you are still alive. That is not meaningless." The Rushan stared at her for a long time. Then she turned and went back to stacking containers. She did not say another word about it. 12 hours after the seal, Jinho finished. The transmitter was ugly. It was a tangle of wires, circuit boards, and salvaged parts held together with adhesive tape and hope. The power cell was wired directly into the console's network interface, which was in turn spliced into the sensor grid wiring that ran behind the wall panel Jinho had removed. It looked like something a child might build as a school project and get a low mark for. But when Jinho switched it on, a small green light appeared on the circuit board, and a faint hum filled the air. "It is live," Jinho said. "Somin, I need your help." Somin knelt beside him. Together they composed a signal, not a voice message. The transmitter did not have the power for audio. Instead, Somin encoded a simple data pattern using the old Earth standard that all human navigators learned in their first year of training. Short pulses and long pulses, an ancient language that predated space travel by centuries. The message was simple. 32 alive. C deck intact. Breach sealed. Request immediate unseal. Somin sent it through the sensor grid, bouncing it off every relay point between C deck and the bridge. On the bridge it would appear as a strange pattern of interference on the environmental monitoring displays. Any technician who looked closely enough would see that the interference was not random. It repeated. It had structure. It was organized. It was a message. On the bridge, Captain Vorshan was reviewing supply manifests for the replacement crew he intended to hire at the next station, when his sensor officer, a young Rushan named Dalif, spoke up from her station. "Captain, I am seeing unusual readings from the C-deck environmental sensors." Vorshan did not look up. "C-deck is sealed and depressurizing. Unusual readings are expected." "Yes, Captain, but these readings are patterned. They repeat every 40 seconds. The same sequence, exactly the same every cycle." That made Vorshan pause. He set down his tablet and walked to the sensor station. Dallas pointed at her screen. The atmospheric pressure readings from C-deck were fluctuating in a rhythm that was clearly not natural. High, low, high, low. Vorshan stared at the pattern. He did not recognize it, but he recognized what it was. It was deliberate. Someone on C-deck was modifying the sensor readings on purpose. Someone on C-deck was sending a message. "That is impossible," he said quietly. "The deck has been sealed for 12 hours. Atmospheric integrity was at 40% when we sealed them in." Daleth checked her readings again. Current atmospheric integrity on C-Deck is at 87%, Captain. The bridge went silent. Vorshin leaned closer to the screen. 87%. That was nearly normal. That was livable. That should not have been possible without a functioning life support system and hull repair equipment, neither of which existed on C-Deck. "Get me a full diagnostic on C-Deck," he said. His voice was no longer calm. For the first time since the breach, something close to uncertainty crossed his face. Temperature on C-Deck was low but stable. Oxygen levels were holding steady. The hull breach that had triggered the entire emergency was showing a pressure differential consistent with a sealed fracture. Someone had patched the hull. Someone had rerouted oxygen. Someone had stabilized an entire sealed deck with nothing but maintenance supplies and cargo. Vorshan stood very still for a long time. Then he said something that no Rushan captain had said in the recorded history of their fleet. "Open a channel to C-Deck." Talek looked at him from across the bridge. "Captain, there is no communication line to a sealed deck." "Then find the signal they are using and answer it," Vorshan said. "They found a way to talk to us. We will find a way to talk back." 5 decks below, Jinho's transmitter blinked. Once, twice. A new pattern appeared on the sensor feed. Not his pattern, a response. He looked at Samin. Samin looked at him. And, for the first time in 12 hours, someone on C-Deck smiled. They sealed off C-Deck. But the humans survived. Part 3, Building from Nothing. 6 hours after the seal, the temperature on C-Deck had dropped to near freezing. Breath came out in thin white clouds. The metal walls were cold to the touch, and the floor felt like ice through the soles of their boots. The Rushan handled cold better than most species. Their thick gray skin was built for it, but the Piddick were suffering badly. Their small bodies were shaking under the thermal blankets that Heian had handed out, and their breathing had become shallow and fast. Yuna had moved the worst cases into the medical bay and sealed the door to keep whatever heat remained inside that one room. She had packed the injured together, body against body, sharing warmth the way humans had done for thousands of years before they ever left Earth. The Rushan found this strange. They did not touch each other for comfort, but they did not resist when Yuna pushed them closer together and told them to stay still. In the corridor outside, Do-hyun stood over a rough map of C-Deck that Selman had drawn on the back of a cargo manifest. The map showed every room, every corridor, every sealed bulkhead, and most importantly, the location of the hull breach. It was in Section 7, behind 2 storage rooms and a utility closet. Selman had traced the airflow patterns using the deck's environmental sensors and narrowed the breach down to a strip of hull plating about half a meter long. "Small," Do-hyun said, studying the map. "Small enough to fix," Selman agreed, "if we had the right tools." That was the problem. C-Deck was not an engineering section. It did not have welding stations, or hull repair kits, or plasma cutters. What it had was storage rooms full of colony supplies, a maintenance closet with basic hand tools, and whatever the crew had been carrying in their pockets when the doors came down. The Rushan system did not allow lower-deck workers to have access to advanced repair equipment. That was reserved for the engineering teams on A-Deck, safely above the sealed bulkheads, probably drinking hot nutrient broth and filing paperwork about the loss of C-Deck. Taewon did not care about what they did not have. He cared about what they did have. He and Unji had spent the last 3 hours going through every container, every drawer, every forgotten corner of the deck. They had spread their findings across the floor of the main corridor like a market stall. Lengths of conduit piping, rolls of industrial adhesive tape, a crate of food-grade silicone sealant meant for colony kitchen installations. Fire suppression canisters, half of them still full. A broken entertainment console, that Jinho was already taking apart piece by piece. Wiring, bolts, sheet metal panels from the interior walls that Unji had pried loose with a crowbar she found in the maintenance closet. Taewon picked up one of the fire suppression canisters and weighed it in his hand. It was a standard model, pressurized with inert gas. When you activated it, the gas came out in a cold, focused stream designed to smother fire. But Taewon was not thinking about fire. He was thinking about pressure. He turned the canister over and studied the nozzle. "If I remove the safety limiter and narrow the output," he said to Do-hyun, "I can increase the pressure of the gas stream by about 400%. It will not be as hot as a real welder, but if I run it over metal slow enough, it will heat the surface. Not enough to melt it, but enough to soften it. Enough to press a patch into place and bond it." Do-hyun looked at him. "You want to turn a fire extinguisher into a welding torch." "I want to turn a fire extinguisher into something useful," Taewon said. "It will not be pretty, but it doesn't need to be pretty. It needs to hold." Do-hyun turned to Unji. "What about the patch itself?" Unji held up a sheet metal panel she had pulled from the wall of one of the storage rooms. It was thin but solid, designed to be decorative rather than structural. On its own, it would not hold against the vacuum outside. But Unji had already thought about that. She had cut the panel down to size using a handsaw from the maintenance closet, and layered the back of it with strips of industrial adhesive tape, overlapping each strip like scales on a fish. Over the tape, she had spread a thick coat of the food-grade silicone sealant. "The tape gives it grip," she explained. "The silicone fills the gaps and hardens when it is exposed to cold. Once I press this over the breech, and Taewon heats the edges, the silicone will bond to the hull. It will not be airtight forever, but it does not need to last forever. It just needs to last long enough." The Rushan crew members watched this conversation with open disbelief. One of them, a middle-aged male named Boruk, finally spoke up. He had been silent since the seal, sitting against the wall like all the others. But something about watching the humans take apart a fire extinguisher and a wall panel had broken through his shock. "That will not work," he said. His voice was flat. "Hull breaches require certified repair systems, level 4 tools at minimum. What you are describing is not engineering, it is guessing." Taewon looked at him. "You are right. Do you have a better guess?" Boruk said nothing. "Then help me carry this to Section 7, Taewon said, and handed him the canister. Boruk stared at the canister in his hands for a long moment. Then he stood up and followed Taewon down the corridor. The work took almost 4 hours. The breach was in an awkward location, behind a support beam in a narrow utility space that barely fit 2 people, standing side by side. Taewon and Unji took turns working in the cramped space, while Do-hyun held a light, and Samin monitored the air pressure readings from outside the room. Every time someone moved wrong, the thin whistle of escaping air got louder, and everyone held their breath. Unji placed the patch first. She pressed it against the cracked hull plating with both hands, leaning her full weight into it, holding it steady, while the adhesive tape grabbed the surface. She could feel the cold of space bleeding through the metal, numbing her fingers in seconds. She held on anyway. Her hands turned white, then red, then something past red that she did not want to think about. She held on. Taewon moved in with the modified canister. He had stripped the nozzle down and fitted a piece of narrow piping over the end to focus the gas stream. When he activated it, the sound was high and sharp, like a kettle screaming. He ran the stream slowly along the edges of the patch, heating the metal just enough for the silicone to soften, spread, and bond. The smell was terrible. The heat in the narrow space was intense, despite the freezing cold everywhere else. Sweat ran down his face and froze on his collar. Samin's voice came from outside the room, calm and clear. "Pressure drop is slowing. You are getting there." Taewon kept going. One edge, two, three, four, all the way around. When he finished, Eunji slowly, carefully pulled her hands away from the patch. It stayed. She stepped back. They both stood there, breathing hard, staring at the ugly, uneven, silicone-smeared patch that now covered the breach. The whistle stopped. For the first time in almost 10 hours, C-Deck was not bleeding air. The silence that followed was different from the silence of the first hour. It was not the silence of surrender. It was the silence of people who had just done something they were not supposed to be able to do. Jinho, who had been working on the broken entertainment console the entire time, chose this moment to speak up from down the corridor. "I have the communications board from this console," he called out. "Give me another hour, and I think I can build us a transmitter." Do-hyun leaned against the wall and closed his eyes for just a moment. His body ached. His hands were numb. His lungs burned from breathing thin, cold air for hours. But somewhere behind his ribs, in the place where humans keep the things that make them get up when they should stay down, something was burning. Not hope. Something older than hope. Something that had been carried in human bones since the first time a person looked at an impossible situation and said, no. He opened his eyes. "Then get to work," he said. They sealed off C-Deck. But the humans survived. Part 2. Refusal to die. The first hour was the worst. Not because of the cold, though the temperature was already dropping. Not because of the air, though everyone could feel it getting thinner with every breath. The first hour was the worst, because of the silence. The kind of silence that comes when people believe they are going to die and have nothing left to say about it. Do-hyun found them scattered across C-Deck in small groups. The Rushan crew members had gathered near the center of the main corridor, sitting against the walls with their long legs pulled up to their chests. Their gray skin had gone pale, almost translucent, and their wide dark eyes stared at nothing. They were not crying. Rushan did not cry, but they had gone still in a way that was worse than crying. Their bodies were there, but their minds had already left. The smaller aliens, a few Piddick workers and 2 Halasi technicians, were in a similar state. The Piddick had curled into tight balls on the floor, their fur standing up along their spines. The Halasi sat perfectly straight, with their 4 hands folded in their laps, breathing slowly, waiting for the end with the kind of patience that comes from total surrender. Do-hyun walked past all of them. He found Yuna in the secondary medical bay. She had already set up a workstation on one of the examination tables. Bandages, sealant gel, oxygen masks, a portable diagnostic scanner, and 3 bottles of saline solution were lined up in neat rows. She was wrapping a pressure bandage around the arm of a young Rushan male who had been cut by flying debris during the breach. The Rushan sat on the table and stared at the wall while Yuna worked. He did not even seem to notice she was there. "How many injured?" Do-hyun asked. 11 that I have found so far," Yuna said. She did not look up from her supplies. 3 serious. 1 Rushan has a broken leg, 1 Piddick has burns on his back, and there is a Halasi near the storage rooms who is not responding to me at all. I think she hit her head. Can you handle it? Yuna finally looked at him. Her face was tired, but steady. I can handle it if I have help. I need someone to move the injured to one location so I am not running all over the deck. You will have help, Do-hyun said. He turned and walked back into the corridor. Jinho was already 2 steps ahead of him. The maintenance tech had pulled open a ventilation panel near the ceiling, and was standing on a stack of supply crates to reach inside. His hands were black with grease, and his face was tight with concentration. Do-hyun watched him for a moment before speaking. What are you doing? A main ventilation system is cut off, Jinho said without looking down. The bridge sealed the air ducts, along with everything else. but there is a secondary oxygen line that runs to the hydroponics bay on the lower section of this deck. It is a closed system, separate from the main supply. If I can reroute it into the main corridor vents, we get breathable air. Will it be enough? Jinho paused. He pulled his head out of the panel and looked at Do-hyun. For 32 people? Maybe. It depends on how fast we are losing air through the breach. But it is better than nothing, and nothing is what we have right now. Do it, Do-hyun said. He found So-min sitting on the floor near the sealed bulkhead, her navigation tablet balanced on her knees. She was not panicking. Her fingers moved across the screen in quick, sharp gestures, pulling up atmospheric readings from the deck's internal sensors. Most of the ship's systems had been cut off when the bridge sealed them in, but the local environmental monitors still worked. They were basic. They only measured temperature, air pressure, and gas composition. But basic was enough. Talk to me, Do-hyun said. So-min did not waste words. Air pressure is dropping slowly. The breach is small, but it is constant. At the current rate of loss, we have maybe 14 hours before the oxygen level drops below what humans can breathe. The Russian need less oxygen than we do, so they have maybe 18 hours. The Piddick need more. They have about 10. And if Jinho gets the hydroponics oxygen flowing? So-min did the calculation in her head. That buys us time, maybe another 6 to 8 hours on top of what we already have. But it doesn't fix the problem. We are still losing air. If we do not seal the breach, we die. It just takes longer. Do-hyun nodded. He had expected that answer. What about temperature? Dropping. The heating system is powered from the main grid, which we are now cut off from. The emergency batteries on this deck will keep the lights and sensors running for about 40 hours. But they cannot power the heaters. It is going to get cold. Very cold. Do-hyun stood up and looked down the corridor. Red emergency lights painted everything in shades of blood and shadow. He could see the shapes of the Russian crew sitting motionless against the walls. He could hear the thin whistle of air escaping through the breach somewhere behind the far wall. And he could feel, in the slight movement of the air against his skin, that the clock was already ticking. He made a decision. He walked to the center of the corridor, where the largest group of Russian crew members sat. He was shorter than all of them. Humans always were compared to Russian. But he stood straight, and he spoke clearly, and his voice carried in the quiet. I know you think we are dead, he said. I know that is what your training tells you. A sealed deck is a lost deck. That is how your ships work. But I need you to understand something. We are not dead yet. We are breathing. Our hearts are beating. And as long as those two things are true, we have work to do. None of them moved. Do-hyun did not get angry. He did not raise his voice. He simply pointed to Yuna's medical bay. There are injured people on this deck who need to be carried to the medical bay. I need 4 of you to do that, now. A long silence followed. Then one of the Russian, an older female with a scar across her jaw, slowly stood up. She did not say anything. She just walked in the direction Do-hyun had pointed. After a moment, 3 more followed her. But it was a start. Taewon and Eunji had already begun moving through the storage rooms, pulling out anything that might be useful. Thermal blankets, emergency rations, cutting tools, lengths of pipe. Eunji found a crate of industrial sealant that had been meant for delivery to a colony world. She dragged it into the corridor and opened it. Taewon found a set of welding rods that were technically not rated for hull repair. He took them anyway. Haeun, the youngest of the humans, was doing something that none of the aliens had thought to do. She was counting. She moved through every room and section of C-Deck with a small notebook she had found in a supply closet, and she wrote down the name and condition of every single person she found. 32 crew members. She confirmed the number, checked it twice, and brought the list to Do-hyun. Everyone is accounted for, she said. Her voice shook slightly, but her handwriting was neat and clear. Do-hyun took the list and looked at it. 32 names, 32 lives. The bridge had already counted them as 0. He folded the paper and put it in his pocket. "Good," he said. "Now let us keep it that way." The Rushan crew watched all of this with a kind of quiet confusion. They had been trained their whole lives to accept the seal. When a deck was lost, it was lost. You mourned the dead, and you moved on. That was the way. That was how ships survived. You did not fight the seal. You did not argue with it. You sat down, and you waited, and you let the cold take you, because fighting was pointless, and acceptance was dignity. But the humans did not sit down. The humans moved, they argued, they shouted instructions at each other across dark corridors. They dragged heavy equipment through narrow passages. They bandaged wounds with torn clothing and held oxygen masks over the faces of strangers. The humans refused. And slowly, one by one, the aliens on C-Deck began to wonder if maybe refusing was an option they had never been taught. They sealed off C-Deck, but the humans survived. Part 1. The Breach. The pale horizon was 3 days into a routine cargo run through the Valen corridor when everything went wrong. The ship was massive, almost a kilometer long from nose to engines, and it carried enough freight to supply 2 colony worlds for a full season. It was not a military vessel. It was not built for danger. It was a working ship crewed by working people, and most of them had made this same trip dozens of times without trouble. C-Deck sat in the belly of the ship, tucked between the lower cargo holds and the engineering section. It was where the maintenance crews lived, where the secondary medical bay operated, and where the ship stored most of its emergency equipment. 32 crew members were on C-Deck when the alarms started screaming. The rest were a mix of Rushan, the tall gray-skinned species that owned and operated the vessel, and a handful of smaller alien species who worked in support roles. Do-Hyun was in the middle of replacing a filtration unit when the first explosion hit. The sound was not like anything he had heard before. It was not a bang or a crash. It was more like the ship itself groaned, like something deep inside the metal had broken apart and cried out. The floor shook, the lights flickered, and then the second explosion came, and this one was much worse. The hull cracked open on the port side of C-Deck. Not a big crack, not wide enough to see the stars through, but wide enough. The air started moving immediately, rushing toward the fracture like water draining from a bathtub. Do-Hyun felt the pressure change in his ears first, then in his chest. He grabbed the edge of a support beam and held on. The alarms changed from a steady pulse to a sharp, repeating scream. Red lights replaced the normal white ones, and then a voice came over the ship-wide communication system. It was calm. It was the voice of the ship's computer, speaking in the flat, emotionless tone that all Rushan vessels used for emergency announcements. Hull breach detected on C-Deck, Section 7. Emergency containment protocol initiated. Bulkhead seals engaging in 60 seconds. 60 seconds. Do-Hyun understood what that meant right away. The Rushan built their ships with a simple philosophy. If a section was damaged, you sealed it off. You closed the heavy blast doors, and you cut that section away from the rest of the ship, like a surgeon cutting away infected flesh. It did not matter who was inside. What mattered was the ship. What mattered was the majority. He started running. Yuna was already in the secondary medical bay when the breach happened. She had been treating a Rushan worker for a minor burn on his arm. When the alarms hit, the Rushan froze. His eyes went wide, and his gray skin turned almost white. Yuna had seen panic before. She had seen it in hospital wards back on Earth, in field clinics during colony emergencies, and in the eyes of people who had just realized they might die. She knew what it looked like, and she knew that the worst thing she could do right now was join in. She grabbed the Rushan by the shoulders and pushed him down into a seat. "Stay here," she said. "Do not move." Then she started pulling supplies off the shelves. bandages, sealant gel, oxygen masks, anything she could carry. She did not know how bad things were going to get, but she knew that having supplies was always better than not having them. 40 seconds left. On the bridge 5 decks above, Captain Vorshan watched the damage reports scroll across his display screen. The hull breach was bad, but contained to one section. The engines were undamaged. Life support on all other decks was functioning normally. The only problem was C deck, and in Vorshan's mind, that problem had a simple solution. "Seal it," he said. His first officer, a younger Rushan named Talek, looked at him. "Captain, there are 32 crew members still on C deck. The evacuation timer has not—" "Seal it now," Vorshan repeated. His voice was steady. There was no anger in it, no cruelty, just the cold math that every Rushan captain was trained to do. 32 lives against the 1,200 on the rest of the ship. The numbers were clear. Reduce the timer. Close the bulkheads. Talek hesitated for only a moment, then entered the command. On C deck, the 60-second countdown jumped to 10. Doyun heard the change in the alarm tone and knew what it meant. Someone on the bridge had made a decision. He stopped running toward the nearest bulkhead exit and turned around. There was no point anymore. The blast doors were already starting to close. He could see them sliding down from the ceiling at the far end of the corridor. Thick slabs of reinforced metal that weighed more than a ground vehicle. Once they locked into place, nothing short of a plasma cutter was going to open them again. The doors sealed with a deep, heavy thud that Do-hyun felt in his bones. Then the corridor went quiet. The ship-wide alarms were cut off. The communication system went dead. The normal hum of the ventilation system stopped. All he could hear was the thin whistle of air being pulled toward the breach and the sound of his own breathing. He stood there for a moment, alone in the red-lit corridor, and let the reality settle over him. They were sealed in. The bridge had written them off. No rescue was coming. No one was going to open those doors. As far as the rest of the ship was concerned, C deck was already a tomb. He turned and saw Jinho coming around the corner, his maintenance uniform covered in dust. Behind Jinho came Salmon, her navigation tablets still clutched in one hand. Then Taewon, then Unji, then Haeun, who looked scared but was still on her feet and still moving. And finally Yuna, carrying an armful of medical supplies, her face calm and focused. 7 humans, all still alive, all still standing. Do-hyun looked at them, and something shifted inside him. It was not hope exactly. It was something harder than hope, something with more teeth. It was the simple, stubborn refusal to accept what the Rushan had decided for them. "All right," he said. "Let us find out how bad this is." They moved together into the darkness of C deck, and they did not look back at the sealed doors behind them.